All right, here we're going to demonstrate the differences between an eyeball dome camera, it's also called a turret dome, versus what we like to call just a glass dome camera. So the differences are how you mount these. So this one, you can mount it like a bullet camera. Like you can mount it to any surface you want. Imagine this is a wall. You can mount it here and then point it out, up, left, and right. Of course, you don't want to point a camera up because what's going to happen is the sun's going to hit the sensor and burn the camera out. Same goes for this one or any other, this other dome camera as well that I have here on the bottom of the frame, or even a bullet camera. So imagine I have this camera mounted on a wall and I'm looking down. So it gives me a lot of, the eyeball and turret domes give me a lot of freedom as to how I can position them. You know, there's so much movement here. I could even put it flat. I can put it on a ceiling, look out straight. I can even look down. So there's a certain degree of freedom that you get from using a turret dome camera. You just kind of have to play around with this. Now the bad thing here is that these are not vandal resistant because I can actually move it while it's in the collar. So that's not a vandal resistant camera. But eyeball domes do give you the freedom of where you're pointing them. That's what I want to get across. Also, this camera's diameter is probably like 4 inches. Now let's compare it to this other camera. This is a glass dome camera. This is our 12 megapixel top of the line IPC4K12D. And the thing here is that you compare the size, see this one's a lot bigger. So the amount of surface area you need to mount this dome camera is going to be larger. This is roughly about 6 inches in diameter. But this is a vandal resistant camera. Once you put the dome cover on and you lock it with the Torx screws on there, you can't really access the camera at all, and it'll be very difficult for someone to try and tamper with it. It's also a little bit harder to mount, and once you get this top on, you use the Torx screwdriver that comes with it. It's a manual hand-driven Allen key. You only want to use that to open and close these screws. If you're using a drill with your own screw bits, these are aluminum screws, you're going to basically warp the screw or ruin its head, and you're not going to be able to use this dome camera anymore. So make sure you use only this Allen key that comes with it. So when you lock this dome camera up after you've mounted it, no one can access it. It's vandal resistant. It's IP67 weather rated as well. And on the other side, there's an entry hole for screw holes for mounting it. These are continuous. When you mount this, screws are coming out of this and mounting it to a surface. So when you're mounting this straight to the surface, make sure your screws are going through eaves or whatever, and make sure that there's no water possibility of leaking through here, because if it does, guess what? It's going to go into the board in the camera. I'm going to show you in a second. The other thing is these two weather grommets, do not tamper with these. Leave them sealed the way they are. They create a watertight seal so that water doesn't go in. If you tamper with these and open them up, and you mount this up somewhere, and let's say you're only using 2 of these mounting screws, water will go in here. That's not the design that is meant for this camera. So make sure you're mounting this towards an eaves with a board or something, or a junction box totally covering up this surface. There's a little tab where the cable can come through, a knockout in there to let it come through. Now this particular camera, the IPC4K12D, also ships with a junction box. So this junction box, the way it's meant to be used is you put the junction box on a wall or eaves, you drill a hole behind the junction box, and this is where your Cat5 cable will come through. There's a little felt pad here. Leave this on, don't take this off. You're supposed to cut it out just a little bit by using a box cutter or something. Poke a hole, or a screwdriver, poke a hole, so your Cat5e coming through the wall or whatever you have going on there comes through here and is inside. And then you put your camera on top of this junction box. There's this little weather seal here that goes with the junction box. And I'm going to open the camera back up. So it's attached by this little string so that this wire so that, you know, the camera top doesn't just fall off. Now when you're connecting this camera to your junction box, pretend your Cat 5e cable is coming through here. You terminate it here, connect it to the camera. You don't use this because it's the 12 volt DC because the camera is PoE. You tuck the wire in and you set the camera on top and you line it up with the holes. So it's a little bit more difficult to mount the camera, but once it's done by a professional, it's going to create a really weather-tight seal. Unfortunately, I'm at a surface where I'm kind of hunching over, so it's hard for me to get this seated correctly, but it takes a little back and forth. And once you're on here, you would screw it here, here, and the third screw here. So those screws that I showed you before, I'll show them again in a second, are continuous with the junction box here, and there's a weather-tight seal. Make sure the junction box is also on a flat surface so there's no water coming through there. So let's show you where the water entry points are. 1, 2, and 3 screws here. If you mount it just without the junction box, water will leak in through these 3 screws, or through here if you tamper with this. Now the junction box itself has these 4 holes on it. If you can see them, that's where the water can come through. Make sure it's on a flat surface. Use a PVC board. If you don't have a full surface to mount to, you have to figure that out. Make sure water does not get into the camera. There are these knockout holes. There's one here and the one here. That's for electrical conduit. Usually a 1.5 inch conduit works fine on this. Just make sure you, on the junction box you're using, you measure the size of the conduit holes before buying your conduit itself and laying it down. Sometimes it's 1 inch, sometimes 3/4. It's different. Now, on the camera itself, when we began the video, I was discussing how a eyeball dome camera, you can basically aim it anywhere you want. It's a lot of degrees of freedom here. There's nothing blocking the infrareds either. With a glass dome, the difference here is that there are infrareds here. So when you mount the camera, you want to make sure you mount it right side up. So what is right side up for this camera? If you mount this camera like so, with the infrareds facing down, and then you put the top cover, guess what? You're gonna block those infrareds with the metal part of the camera case, and they're gonna bounce around inside. That's not how you mount this camera. The correct way to mount the camera is with the infrareds facing towards the top of the dome. So it should be like this. So that the infrareds are not being impeded or obstructed in any way by the metal case or trim on the dome cover. That's how it should be mounted. So the infrareds can come out. And this is actually right side up. So when you mount this camera this way, it's right side up. This camera is meant to be mounted on an eaves, like this, so it can look. There's certain degrees of freedom as to how much you can then move around this eyeball. So you can move around like all the way down. There are these tabs that limit your movement so that the assembly doesn't break. It's also telling you which way is the right way. So this is the right way. Okay? You can also basically turn this to bring the image, rotate it, so you're not using any of the digital manipulation methods. So you can rotate the camera assembly to be right side up. But again, if you mount it this way, wrong, it'll get blocked. You can also rotate here, if you can see that. Now, be careful when you're doing that. There is a cable assembly behind this camera. You're going to break those if you play around with it too much, so be very gentle when mounting it. All right. So I can put my finger there and make sure it's right side up. I would mount it, have the IRs not be blocked by anything, and then I can angle it. Now, how much can you angle it parallel with the surface here? It's this much. And then once you're there, you can lock it with the screws on the side. You will lock them with a screwdriver, and then put your glass cover on top. So So this glass cover, make sure it's seated correctly. Very important that you use this weather seal on it too. If you don't, you're gonna get water going through. Again, water entry into the camera is not covered by the warranty. That means it wasn't mounted properly. Make sure you mount it correctly, position the camera. So it gives you a lot of freedom on where you can point it. However, you have to understand how to mount it correctly so that you don't have water going into the camera through these holes. Make sure you have enough of a surface on top covering the screw coming through here. So when you mount this, the screws are going to be being put through here. Make sure you don't use a drill. You pre-drill your screws and then use a manual screwdriver, because if your screwdriver slips and hit this, it may damage the camera or it may cut the wires. That's not covered by a warranty either. So please take care in using your equipment. It's expensive camera equipment that needs to be installed professionally or with responsibility after reviewing these guides, such as this one. Thanks for watching.